Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Om Ganana Antva Ganapati Gammavamahe Kavinam Upavashravastramam Jeshtarajam Brahmanan Brahmanaspata Anushrunnoti Dasadanam. Om Mahaganadipataye Namaha. Mahaganadipataye Namaha. Om Mahaganadipataye Namaha. Om Keshwaya Namaha. Om Narayana Namaha. Om Madhvaya Namaha. Om Govindaya Namaha. Om Vishnuvaya Namaha. Om Namaha. Trivikramaya Namaha. Vamanaya Namaha. Sridharaya Namaha. ऋषिकेशाय नमः पद्मनाभाय नमः दामोदराय नमः संकर्षणाय नमः वासुदेवाय नमः प्रद्युम्नाय नमः अनिरुद्धाय नमः उत्तमाय नमः दोक्षाय नमः नारसिंहाय नमः अच्युताय नमः जनार्दनाय नमः उपेन्द्राय नमः हरे नमः श्री कृष्णाय नमः हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम. Dear friends and devotees, we came to the 13th chapter of 11th canto of Bhagavath Purana. In this chapter, Lord Krishna explains to Uddhava how human beings, overwhelmed by sense gratification, become bound by three modes of nature, which are three modes is Rajasika, Tamasika, and Swatvika. The Lord then describes how he appeared in the form of Hamsa Avathara before Brahma and the four sages headed by Sanaka, Sanankarandadi, and revealed to them various confidential truths. The three modes of goodness is passion is Rajasika, goodness is Satvika, and ignorance or Tamasika are related to material intelligence, not to the soul. One should conquer the lower modes of passion and ignorance by the help of Satvika. You can overtake the Rajasika and Tamasika guna by making use of Satvika guna. And then one must surpass the mode of goodness by acting in the transcendental mode of pure goodness. So Satvika Rupa becomes Shuddha Sattva. We have to attain Shuddha Sattva. By associating with things in the mode of goodness, one becomes more fully situated with things in the mode of goodness. One becomes more fully situated in that mode. The three modes increase their different influences through various types of scripture, water, place, time, beneficiaries of activity, natures of activity, birth and meditation, mantras, purificative rituals, and so on. Lacking discrimination, one identifies with the material body and consequently the mode of passion, which produces misery, takes over the mind, which is normally in the mode of goodness. As the mind evolves its function of decision and doubt, it creates intolerable hackerings for some gratification. Unfortunate persons who are bewildered by the urges of the mode of passion become the slaves of their senses. Even though they know that the eventual result of their work will be suffering, they cannot avoid engaging in such fruitive work. A discriminating person, on the other hand, keeps himself detached from the objects of the senses and by utilizing appropriate renunciation, takes shelter of unalloyed devotional service. So the devotees should take unalloyed devotional service. So to increase the Shuddha Sattva, chances of you become Sattvika first is your habits. And after attaining the Sattvika state, to go to Shuddha Sattva, you have to involve in the devotional services all the time. Lord Brahma himself has no material cause. He is the cause of creation of all living beings and is the greatest among all the other gods. Yet Brahma is always gets agitation on the mind sometime on account of the duties to his perform. Therefore, when he was questioned by his sons Sanaka and Sanandari, headed by Sanaka, who were born from his mind about the means for driving away desires for sense gratification. So Sanaka were asking Brahma how to get rid of these desires of sense gratification to increase our sattva. He is incapable of giving them an answer immediately. In order to receive some insight into this matter, he took the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu, whereupon the Supreme Lord appeared before him in the form of a swan, incarnation, Hamsa Avathara. Lord Hamsa is the Avathara. Lord Hamsa proceeded to give instructions about the categorical identity of the self, that is Atma, soul, the different states of consciousness, wakeful awareness, sleep, and deep sleep. Three type of awareness. One is consciousness. Consciousness is divided into categorically wakeful awareness, sleeping awareness, and deep sleep, and the means for conquering over material existence. The sages headed by Sanaka became freed from all their doubts by hearing the words of the Lord and worshipped him with a pure devotion to the mature love of God. While describing the situation to Uddhava, Lord Krishna explained that when Brahma was asked, he was telling in the Hamsa Avathara and explained situation to Sanaka Sanandari. So this is the summary of this chapter. It starts with the Bhagavan Vacha. Sattvam rajastama iti guna bhaddena chatmanaha sattvenanattamau anyatatmam satyeva chaivahi. Priya Uddhava, Sattva Rajastama, ಈ ಮೂರುಗಳು ಬುದ್ಧಿಯದಾಗಿದೆ. Intelligence has got three. Sattva, Sattvica, Rajasika, and Tamasika. ಈ ಸತ್ವಗುಣದ ಮೂಲಕ, by using the Sattva-guna, you have to remove the Tamasa-guna and Rajasika-guna by the help of Sattva-guna. To increase the Sattva-guna, you have to use your intelligence. Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, is telling Uddhava the three modes of material nature, namely goodness, that is Sattvika Guna, passion, Rajasika Guna, and ignorance, Tamasika Guna, pertain to material intelligence and not to the spirit soul. These gunas are pertaining to material intelligence. You intelligently decide to follow the Sattvika food and become a Sattvika person. And again, do more devotional work, it will be a Sattvika. By development of material goodness, one can conquer the modes of passion and ignorance. Here Krishna says, by development of material goodness, the Sattva Guna, by increasing the Sattva Guna, one can conquer the modes of Rajoguna and Tamasika Guna. And by cultivation of transcendental goodness, one may free oneself even the material goodness. Shuddha Sattva you can reach by following the transcendental goodness. Goodness in the material world never exists in a pure form. Therefore, it is common knowledge that on the material platform, no one is working without personal motivation. In the material world, goodness, that is Sattva-guna, is always mixed with some amount of Rajosika-guna and Tamasa-guna, whereas spiritual or purified goodness, Vishuddha Sattva, represents the liberated platform of perfection. Materially, one is proud to be an honest, compassionate man, but unless one is fully Krishna consciousness, one will speak truths that are not ultimately significant, and one will give mercy that is ultimately useless. Because the onward march of material time removes all situations and the persons from the material stage, our so-called mercy and the truth apply to the situations that shortly will not exist. Real truth is eternal, and real mercy means to situate people in the eternal truth. Still, for an ordinary person, cultivation of material goodness may be a preliminary stage on the road to Krishna consciousness. That means first you have to attain Sattvika Guna, remove the Rajasika Guna and remove the Tamasika Guna and attain only Sattva Guna, then it will be first step to become Krishna conscious. For example, it is stated in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam that one who is addicted to meat eating cannot understand the pastimes of Lord Krishna. By cultivation of the material mode of goodness, however, one may become a vegetarian and perhaps come to appreciate the sublime process of Krishna consciousness. Since it is clearly stated in Bhagavad Gita that the material modes of nature constantly rotate, one must take advantage of the an elevated position in material goodness to step onto the transcendental platform. Otherwise, as the wheel of time turns on, one will again go into the darkness of material ignorance. Sattva dharmo bhavedva dvatumsu madbhakshilakshana satvikopasaya sattvam tato dharma pravartate tato dharma pravartate. This is the second shloka of the 13th chapter. When the living entity becomes strongly situated in the mode of goodness, then religious principles characterized by devotional service to Lord Krishna become prominent. One can strengthen the mode of goodness by cultivation of those things that are already situated in the goodness, and thus religious principles arise. Dharmo rajastamo hanna tattva vruddhiranuttamaha atunashyati tanmolo dharma ubayehate. Religious principles strengthened by the mode of goodness destroy the influence of Tamasa guna and Rajasika guna. When passion and ignorance are overcome, their original cause, irreligion, is quickly vanquished. According to the quality of religious scriptures, water, one's association with one's children or with people in general, the particular place, the time, activities, birth, meditation, chanting of mantras, and purificatory rituals, the modes of nature become differently prominent. The 10 items mentioned above possess superior and inferior qualities and are thus identified as being in goodness, passion, or ignorance. One can increase the mode of goodness by selecting religious scriptures in goodness. Pure water, Sattva Guna increases by using a pure water, friendship with other persons in goodness, following the making a group of Sattva people, and so on. One should scrupulously avoid any of these 10 items that may be polluted by an inferior mode of nature. Among the 10 items I have just mentioned, the great sage who understand Vedic knowledge have praised and recommended those that are in the mode of goodness, criticized and rejected those in the mode of ignorance, and shown indifference to those in the mode of passion. Until one revives one's direct knowledge of the spirit soul and drives away the illusory identification with the material body and mind caused by three modes of nature, one must cultivate those things in the mode of goodness. By increasing the mode of goodness, one automatically can understand and practice religious principles, and by such practice, transcendental knowledge is awakened. One who desires to cultivate the mode of goodness must consider the following points. One should study religious scriptures that teach detachment from mental speculation and in material sense gratification, not scriptures that provide rituals and mantras to increase material ignorance. Such materialistic scriptures do not give attention to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, and thus are basically atheistic. I don't think they are atheistic, but it's a different prayers of different mantras. You can't say they are atheistic. One should accept pure water for quenching thirst and cleaning the body. One should accept pure water for quenching thirst and cleaning the body. There is no need for a devotee to use colognes, perfume, whiskey, beer, etc., which are all polluted manifestations of water. One should associate with persons who are cultivating detachment from the material world and not with those who are materially attached and are sinful in their behavior. One should live in a solitary place where devotional service is practiced and discussed among the Vaishnavas. One should not be spontaneously attracted to busy highways, shopping centers, sports stadiums, and so on. Concerning time, one should rise by 4 o'clock. Considering the time, one should rise in the morning by 4 o'clock in the morning and utilize the auspicious Brahma Muhurta to advance in Krishna consciousness. Similarly, one should avoid the sinful influence of hours such as midnight when ghosts and demons are encouraged to become active. Concerning work, One should execute one's prescribed duties, follow the regulative principles of spiritual life, and utilize all of one's energy for pious purposes. Time should not be wasted in frivolous or materialistic activities, of which there are now literally millions in modern society. One can cultivate birth in the mode of goodness by accepting the second birth of initiation. One can cultivate birth in the mode of goodness by accepting the second birth of initiation of Gayatri from a bona fide spiritual master and learning to chant the Hare Krishna mantra also, in addition to Gayatri mantra. One should not accept initiation or so-called spiritual birth in unauthorized mystical or religious cults in the mode of passion and ignorance. One should meditate upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the enjoyer of all sacrifices. And similarly, one should meditate on the lives of the great devotee and saintly persons. One should not meditate on lusty women and envious men. Concerning mantras, one should follow the example of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra and not other songs, verses, poetry, or mantras that glorify the kingdom of illusion. Particularly, rituals should be performed to purify the spirit soul and not to bring down material blessings on one's material household. Among all the mantras, we can chant Vishnu Sahasranama and Lalita Sahasranama. Both are very auspicious, and the material blessings of what is required for them life is also available in that. But to attain Sattva to increase Sattva we have to change our eating habits. Unless we eat Sattvika food, the Sattva is not going to reach you. One who increases the mode of goodness will certainly become fixed in religious principles, and automatically knowledge will arise. As knowledge increases, one is able to understand the eternal spirit soul and the supreme soul, Lord Krishna. Thus the soul becomes free from the artificial imposition of the gross and subtle material bodies caused by the modes of material nature. Spiritual knowledge burns to ashes. The spiritual knowledge burns to ashes the material designations. Spiritual knowledge can burn the material designation that cover the living entity, and one is real and eternal life begins. In a bamboo forest, the wind sometimes rubs the bamboo stalks together, and such friction generates a blazing fire that consumes the very source of its birth, the bamboo forest. Thus, the fire is automatically calmed by his own action. Similarly, by the competition and interaction of the material modes of nature, the subtle and gross material bodies are generated. If one uses his mind and body to cultivate knowledge, then such enlightenment destroys the influence of the modes of nature that generated one's body. Thus, like the fire, the body and the mind are pacified by their own actions in destroying the source of their birth. The word gunavyatya jaya is significant in this verse. Vyatyaya indicates change or inversion in the normal order of things. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura has described the concept of Vyatyavya by giving the Sanskrit synonym Vaishamya, which indicates inequality or disproportionate diversity. Thus, it is understood by the term Guna Vyatyaya that the body is generated by the unstable relationship of the three modes of material nature, which exist everywhere in the constantly changing proportion. There is a constant strife among the modes of nature. The good person is sometimes torn by passion, and a passionate person sometimes wants to give up everything and rest. An ignorant person may sometimes become disgusted with his depraved life, and a passionate person may sometimes indulge in bad habits in the mode of ignorance. Due to the interactive conflict of the modes of nature, one wanders throughout the material nature, creating one body after another by one's own work karma. As it is said, variety is the mother of the enjoyment, and the variety of material modes gives hopes to the conditioned souls that by changing their material situation, their unhappiness and frustration can be turned into happiness and satisfaction. But even if one acquires relative material happiness, that will soon be disturbed by the inevitable flux of the material modes. Uddhava is asking Krishna, Vidanti martya prayena vishayan padamapadam tatapi bhanjante krishnam tatkatam shukarajavat tatkatam shukarajavat. Sri Uddhava says, my dear Krishna, generally human beings know that material life brings that great future and happiness, and still they try to enjoy material life. My dear Lord, how can one knowledge act just like a dog or ass or a goat? The standard of methods of enjoyment in the material world are sex, money, and false prestige, all of which are obtained with great sufferings and eventually lost. One engaged in material life suffers in the present and has only a very bleak future to look forward to in the continuing cycle of birth and death. Thus, how can human beings who have seen these things and know them very well continue to enjoy life like dogs, asses, and goats? Often a dog will approach a bitch of sex, but the lady dog may not be attracted and will show her teeth and snail and threaten the poor dog with a serious injury. Still, he goes about his business trying to get a little sex pleasure. Similarly, many times a dog risks being beaten or shot while stealing some food in a place where he knows he should not go. The ass is very attracted to the she-ass, but the lady ass often kicks him in the legs. Similarly, the ass's master gives the ass a handful of grass which the poor ass could get anywhere, and then burdens him with great loads. The goat is generally raised for a slaughter, and even when the goat is brought into the slaughterhouse, he shamelessly goes after the lady goat to get sex pleasure. In this way, even at the risk of being shot, bitten, beaten, and slaughtered, animals persist in their foolish sense gratification. How can an educated human being commit himself to such a condemned way of life, wherein the result is practically the same as that of the animals? If by cultivating the mode of goodness, one's life is filled with happiness, enlightenment, and future reward, why would one cultivate the modes of passion and ignorance? This is Uddhava's question. Sri Bhagavan Vacha, 9th and 10th Shloka. Sri Bhagavanuvacha ahamityanyata buddhihi pramatasya yatha hrudihi utsarpati rajo ghoram tato vaikarikam manaha rajo yuktasya manasaha sankalpaha savikalpakaha tata kama gunadhyana dusapna swanna swadir mamarate swadir durdate swadir durmate Sadvi Durmate. Supreme Personality of God, Krishna says, my dear Uddhava, a person bereft of intelligence first falsely identifies himself with the material body and mind. When such false knowledge arises within one's consciousness, material passion, the cause of great suffering, pervades the mind, which by nature is situated in goodness. Then the mind, contaminated by passion, becomes absorbed in making and changing many plans or material advancement. Thus, by constantly thinking of the modes of material nature, a foolish person is afflicted with material, unbearable material desires. Unbearable material desires. Those who are trying to enjoy material sense gratification are not actually intelligent, although they consider themselves most intelligent. Although such foolish persons themselves criticize the miseries of material life in innumerable books, songs, newspapers, television programs, civic committees, etc., they cannot desist from material life for a single moment. The process by which one is helplessly bound in illusion, clearly described here. A materialistic person is always thinking, oh, what a beautiful house. I wish we could buy it. Or what a beautiful woman. I wish I could touch her. Or what a powerful position. I wish I could occupy it. And so on. The words sankalpa, sa, vikalpa, ksha indicate that the materialist is always making a new plans or modifying his old plans to increase his material enjoyment. Although in his saner moments, he admits the material life is full of suffering. The mind is created from the mode of goodness as described in the Sankhya philosophy, and the natural peaceful situation of the mind is pure love of Krishna, in which there is no mental disturbance and disappointment or confusion. Artificially, the mind is dragged down to a lower platform in passion or ignorance, and thus one is never satisfied. Artificially, the mind is dragged down to a lower platform in passion or ignorance, and thus one is never satisfied. Karoti kama vashagaha karmanya vichitendriyaha dukkhodorkani sampashyan rajo vegavidohitaha rajo vegavidohitaha vegavido mohitaha. One who does not control material senses comes under the control of material desire and is thus bewildered by the strong waves of the mood of passion. Such a person executes material activities, although clearly seeing that the result will be future unhappiness. रजस्तमोभ्यां यदपि विद्वान् भिक्षपदीं पुनः अतीन्द्रितो मनो यञ्जन् दोष वृष्टिं सज्जते दोषदृष्टि न सर्जते. Although the intelligence of a learned person may be bewildered by the modes of passion and ignorance, he should again carefully bring the mind under control by clearly seeing the contamination of the modes of nature. He does not become attached. A person should be attentive and grave and never lazy or morose. Mastering the yoga procedures of breathing and sitting properly, one should practice fixing the mind on me at dawn, noon, and sunset. And thus gradually the mind should be completely absorbed in me. Etavan yoga adhishto michyaye sarakadhivi sarvato mana akrishya maya dveshavete mataha maya doshyate tata. एतावान् योग आदिष्टो मुच्चिष्टे सनकादिभिः सर्वतो मन आकृष्टा मय्यध्यावेश्यते यतः. The actual yoga system as taught by my devotees headed by Sanaka Kumara is simply this. Having withdrawn the mind from all other objects, one should directly and appropriately absorb in Lord Krishna. The word yatha accordingly or properly indicates that like Uddhava, one should hear directly from the Lord Krishna in his bona fide representative and directly Ada fix the mind on Lord Krishna. 15th shloka Uddhava Yada tvam sanakadibhyo yena rupena keshavaha yogamadishtavan etad rupamichyami veditam. Sri Uddhava says, my dear Keshava, what time and in what forum did you instruct the science of yoga to Sanaka and brothers? I now desire to know about those things. Sri Bhagavan Vacha Putra Hiranyagarbhasya Manasa Sanakadayaha Prapuchipitaram Sukshma Yoga Saikantiki Gatim. Supreme Personality Godhead said, once the mental sons of Lord Brahma, that is Sanakadi sages headed by Sanaka, inquired from their father about the difficult subject matter of the supreme goal of yoga. Sanakadaya uvacha guneshva vitate guneshva vishate cheto gunaschetasi che prabho katamanyonu santyago mumakshorati tirshano mumakshorati tirshno. O Lord, people's minds are naturally attached to material sense objects, and similarly, the sense objects in the form of desire enter within the mind. Therefore, how can a person who desires liberation, who desires to cross over activities of sense gratification, destroy this mutual relationship between the sense objects and the mind? Please explain this to us. As described above, as long as one is a conditioned soul, the modes of material nature manifested in the form of sense objects constantly disturb the mind, and by their harassment, one is deprived of the actual perfection of life. Sri Bhagavanuvacha evam prushto mahadevah swayambho bhurta bhavanah ध्यायमानः प्रश्नबीजं नाद्यपद्यत कर्मदि. Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna says to Uddhava, my dear Uddhava, Brahma himself, who is born directly from the body of the Lord and who is the creator of all living entities within the material world, being the best of among the gods, seriously contemplated the question of his sons headed by Sanaka. The intelligence of Brahma, however, was affected by his own activities of creation, and thus he could not discover the essential answer to this question. Srila Jiva Goswami has quoted 3 verses of the 2nd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam as follows. In the 9th canto, chapter verse 32, Lord Krishna blessed Brahma with realized knowledge of the Lord's actual form, qualities, and activities. In the 9th chapter, verse 37, the Lord ordered Brahma to rigidly carry out the Lord's injunctions and affirmed that Brahma would thus never be bewildered in his cosmic decision making. In the 6th chapter, verse 34, Lord Brahma assured his son Narada, O Narada, because I have caught hold of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality Godhead, Hari, with a great zeal. However, whatever I say has never proved to have been false, nor is the progress of my mind ever deterred, nor are my senses ever degraded by temporary attachment to the matter. In the present verse, in this 13th chapter of the 11th canto, Lord Krishna states that Brahma unfortunately did become bewildered by his creative functions, thus providing a grave lesson to all the Lord's empowered responsibilities representatives. Although one may be elevated to an exalted position in the Lord's transcendental service at any moment, there is danger of false pride polluting one's devotional mentality. Lord Brahma desired to attain the answer to the question that was puzzling him, and thus he fixed his mind on Lord Krishna, the Supreme Lord. At that time, in my form of Hamsa, I became visible to Lord Brahma as an Hamsa Avathara. Hamsa means swan, and the specific ability of the swan is to separate a mixture of milk and water, extracting the rich milky portion. Similarly, Lord Krishna separated his Hamsa, or the swan, in order to separate the pure consciousness. Similarly, Lord Krishna appeared like Hamsa, or the swan, in order to separate the pure consciousness of Lord Brahma from the modes of material nature. Društva mam ta upavrajya krutva padabhivandanam brahmanamagritam krutva prapuchako bhavya bhavaniti. Thus seeing me, the sages, placing Brahma in the lead, came forward and worshipped my lotus feet. Then they frankly asked me, who are you? Sri Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur comments, when Brahma was unable to answer the question placed by the sages, he fixed his mind in thought of Supreme Lord. The Lord then assumed the form of Hamsa, appeared as a Hamsa Avathara, and appeared before Lord Brahma and the sages, who proceeded to inquire about the specific Ityam Munabi Purushtastattva Jijnasu Vistida Yadovachamaham Tebhyas Taduddava Nibodhame. My dear Uddhava, the sages, being eager to understand the ultimate truth of the yoga system, thus inquired from me. Now please hear as I explain that which I spoke unto the sages of Sanaka Maharaj, Sanaka Sanandari. Vastuno yadyananaatmaatmanam prashna idrushaha katam gateshavo viprabhakturva make ashrayaha. My dear Brahmanas, if one asking me who I am, I believe that I am also a jiva, soul, and that there is no ultimate difference between us. Since all souls are ultimately one without individuality, then how is your question possibly be appropriate? Ultimately, what is the real situation of resting place, both of yourself and of me? Ashraya means the resting place or shelter. Lord Krishna's question, that is our actual resting place or shelter, means what is our ultimate nature or constitutional position. This is because no one can come to rest or be satisfied unless one is one's natural position. The example is given that one may travel all over the world, but ultimately one becomes satisfied by returning to one's own home. Similarly, a crying child is satisfied when embraced by its own mother. By inquiring about the shelter or resting place of himself and the Brahmanas, the Lord is indicating that the eternal constitutional position of every living entity. If Lord Krishna were also in the Jiva category, and if all living entities, including him, were thus equal, there must also if all living entities, including him, were thus equal, there would be no deep purpose in one living entity inquiring at another answering question. If by asking me, who are you, you are referring to the material body, then I must point out that all material bodies are constituted by 5 elements, namely the earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Thus, you should all ask, who are you 5? If you consider that all material bodies are ultimately one, being constituted essentially by same elements, then your question is still meaningless. Since there would be no deep purpose in distinguishing one body from another, thus it appears that in the asking my identity, you are merely speaking words without any real meaning of purpose. So we are going to the 24th shloka. Manasa vachasa društva griheten Indriyaha ahameva namatto jnati buddhyatvamanjasa. Within this world, whatever is perceived by mind, speech, eyes, or other senses is me alone and nothing besides me. All of you, please understand this by a straightforward analysis of the facts. Lord Krishna has already explained that if the sages consider all living entities to be the same, or if they consider living entity to be the same as his body, then their question, who are you, is inappropriate. Now the Lord refutes the conception that he is supreme God, far beyond and different from everything within this world. Modern agnostic philosophers preach that good gods created the world and then retired or went away. According to them, God has no tangible connection in this world. According to them, God has no tangible connection within this world, nor does he interfere in human affairs. Ultimately, they claim God is so great that he cannot be known. Therefore, no one should waste time trying to understand a God. Refute such foolish ideas. Therefore, the Lord here explains that since everything is expansion of his potency, he is not different from anything. Nothing can exist separately. He is not different from his creation. Therefore, what is the meaning of the question, who are you? We can clearly see what the Lord is. Text 25. Guneshva vishate cheto गुणश्चेतसि च प्रवाह जीवस्य देह उभयं गुणश्चेतो मदात्मनः. My dear sons, the mind has a natural proclivity to enter into the material sense objects, and similarly, the sense objects enter into the mind. But both this material mind and the sense objects are merely designations that cover the spirit soul, who is part and parcel of me. Lord Krishna, in the form of Hamsa Avathara, on the pretext of finding contradictions in the simple inquiry of the sons of Brahma, who are you, is actually preparing to teach the sages perfect spiritual knowledge, but only after first rejecting two false identification. Is actually Lord Krishna actually preparing to teach the sages perfect spiritual knowledge, but only after first rejecting two false concepts of life, namely that all living entities are the same in all respects, and that the living entity is identical with his outward or subtle body. Lord Krishna now answers the difficult question that puzzled even Lord Brahma. According to Srila Chakravarti Thakura, the sons of Lord Brahma are thinking as follows. Our dear Lord, if it is indeed true that we are unintelligent, still your leadership has Our dear Lord, if it is indeed true that we are unintelligent, still your Lordship has stated that you are actually everything, because everything is the expansion of your potency. Whatever we do is a part of expansion of Lord Krishna. That's how they ended up. Guneshu chavachitratyammaveksham gunasevaya gunashcha chitta prabhava madrupa ubhayam tajet. Madrupa ubhayam tajet. A person who has thus achieved me by understanding that he is not different from me realizes that the material mind is locked within these sense objects because of constant sense gratification, and that the material objects are existing prominently within the material mind. Having understood my transcendental nature, he gives up both the material mind and in its objects. Waking, sleeping, and deep sleep are the three functions of the intelligence and are caused by the modes of material nature. The living entity within the body is ascertained to possess characteristics of different from these three states, and thus remains us a witness to them. The spirit soul actually has nothing to do with the material world, having no permanent natural relationship with it. Real renunciation means to give up the illusory identification with matter in its subtle and gross forms. Susuptam, or deep sleep, indicates sleeping without any dreams or conscious activities. These three states are described by Lord Krishna as follows. Sattvajagatam sattvajaganatam vidyat rajasto swapam adis prasvapam tamsa jantaro turyam tirusanathanam. One should know that wakefulness is born of mode of goodness, dreams from the mode of passion, and the dream of Krishna consciousness is important. One should know that wakefulness is born of the mode of goodness is Sattvaguna, dreams from the mode of passion is Rajasic Guna, and deep, dreamless sleep from the mode of ignorance, Tamoguna. The fourth element is pure consciousness, is different from those three and pervades them. Real freedom means Sakshitvena, or to exist as a witness to the functions of illusion. Such an advantageous position is achieved by development of Krishna consciousness. Yergi samskriti bando yamatmana gunavrittidaha mayituriyo stito jakyatmam gunachetasam. Lord Krishna now specifically answers the questions that sages originally placed before Lord Brahma. Ultimately, the spirit soul has nothing to do with the material sense objects and modes of nature. But because one's false identification with material body, the modes of nature are empowered to engage one in illusory occupations. By destroying this false identification with matter, the soul gives up the illusory occupations awarded by the modes of modes of nature. It's clearly stated in this verse that the living entity is not empowered to independently free himself from the illusion, but must situate himself in Krishna consciousness, in full awareness of the Supreme Lord. We came to this text, slokas 29th. Ahankara kritam bandhamatmanortha viparyamam vidwan nivriddha samsara chintam turye stitasya chet stitasya stitasya. The false ego of living entity places him in the bondage and awards him exactly the opposite of what he really desires. Therefore, an intelligent person should give up his constant anxiety to enjoy material life and remain situated in the Lord, who is beyond the functions of material consciousness. According to my instructions, one should fix the mind on me alone. Lord Krishna says that Krishna's instruction is all devotees should fix their mind on Krishna alone. If, however, one continues to see many different values and goals in life rather than seeing everything within me, then although apparently awake, one is actually dreaming due to incomplete knowledge, just as one may dream that one has awakened from the dream. One who is not Krishna conscious cannot understand that everything is resting within Lord Krishna, and thus it is impossible for him to retire from material sense of gratification. One may adopt a perpendicular process of salvation and consider oneself to be saved. Nevertheless, his material conditioning will remain, and thus he will maintain his attachment to the material world. While one is dreaming, he sometimes imagines that he has awakened from a dream and is experiencing some normal consciousness. Similarly, one may consider oneself to be saved, but if he remains absorbed in the making material value judgments between good and bad, without reference to the devotional service to the Supreme Lord, he is understood to be conditioned soul covered by the illusory identification with matter. These are the people with some conditioned soul mixing the matter of uninterestings in the good Krishna consciousness situation. Those states of existence that are conceived of as separate from the Supreme Personality of Godhead have no actual existence, although they create a sense of separation from absolute truth, just as the seer of a dream imagines many different activities and rewards. Similarly, because of the sense of an existence separate from the Lord's existence, the giving entity, Lord, living entity, falsely performs fruitive activities, thinking them to be the cause of the future rewards and destination. While awake, the living entity enjoys with all of his senses the fleeting characteristics of material body and mind. While dreaming, he enjoys similar experiences within the mind. And in deep dreamless sleep, all such experiences merge into ignorance by remembering and contemplating the succession of wakefulness, dreaming, and deep sleep. The living entity can understand that he is one throughout the three stages of consciousness and is transcendental. Thus, he becomes the Lord of the senses. He has to control the senses and he make more Shuddha Sattva, Sattvika Guna in his life. In a verse, you should consider how, by the influence of my illusory energy, these three states of mind caused by the modes of nature have been artificially imagined to exist in me. Having definitely ascertained the truth of the soul, you should utilize the sharpened sword of knowledge acquired by logical reflection and from the instructions of the sages and Vedic literature to completely cut off the false ego, which is the breeding ground of all doubts. All of you should then worship me, who am situated within the heart. One who has obtained transcendental knowledge is no longer dependent on the three stages of ordinary consciousness, namely waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep. One thus rids one's material mind of the tendency to become the enjoyer of the inferior energy of the Lord, and one sees everything as a part and parcel of the Lord's potency, meant only for the enjoyment of the Lord Himself. In such a state consciousness, one naturally surrenders fully to the Lord's devotional service, which Lord Hamsa here advises the sons of Lord Brahma to take up. One should see that the material world is a distinct illusion appearing in the mind because of material objects have an extremely flickering existence and are here today and gone tomorrow. They can be compared to the streaking red line created by whirling a fiery stick. The spirit soul by nature exists in the single state of pure consciousness. However, in this world, he appears in many different forms and stages of existence. The modes of nature divide the soul's consciousness into normal wakefulness, dreaming, and dreamless sleep. All such varieties of perception, however, are actually Maya and exist only like a dream. Having understood the temporary illusory nature of material things and thus having pulled one's vision away from illusion, one should remain without material desires. It is very difficult. Material desires, we have to live without material desires. By experiencing the happiness of the soul, one should give up the material speaking and activities. If sometimes one must observe the material world, one should remember that it is not the ultimate reality, and therefore one has given it up. By such constant remembrance up till the time of the death, one will not again fall into the illusion. To maintain the material body, one cannot avoid eating and sleeping. In these and other ways, one will sometimes be forced to deal with the material world and the physical aspects of one's own body. At such time, one should remember that the material world is not actually reality, and that therefore one has given it up to become Krishna conscious. By such constant remembrance, by enjoying the spiritual bliss within himself, and by retiring from any material activities of the mind, speech, and body, one will not fall into the material category again. By such constant remembrance, by enjoying spiritual bliss within oneself, and by retiring from any material activities of the mind, speech, or body, one will not fall into the material illusion anymore. That is difficult, but we need to achieve it. Just as drunken man does not notice if he is wearing his coat or shirt, similarly, one who is perfect in self-realization and who has thus achieved his eternal identity does not notice whether the temporary body is sitting or standing. Indeed, if by God's will the body is finished, or by God's will he obtains a new body. A self-realized soul does not notice, just as a drunken man does not notice the situation for his outward dress. The material body certainly moves under the control of supreme destiny and therefore must continue to live along with the senses and vital air as long as one's karma is in effect. A self-realized soul, however, who is awakened to the absolute reality and who is thus highly situated in the perfect stage of yoga, will never again surrender to the material body and its manifold manifestation, knowing it to be just like a body visualized in a dream. My dear Brahmanas, that is Sanaka Sanandad, I have now explained to you the confidential knowledge of Sankhya, by which one philosophically distinguishes matter from spirit, and Analoga Yoga, by which one links up with the Supreme. Please understand that I am the Supreme Personal Godhead Vishnu and that I have appeared before you desiring to explain your actual religious duty, to increase the faith of the Lord Brahma's sons and establish prestige of his teachings. Lord Krishna, now in the form of Hamsa, formally identifies himself as the Supreme Personal Godhead Vishnu. As stated in the Vedic literature, Yajno Vai Vishnu. Yajno Vai Vishnu. After explaining the Sankhya and Ashtanga Yoga system, the Lord clearly answers the original question of the sages. Who are you, sir? Thus Lord Brahma and his sons were enlightened by Lord Hamsa. O best of the Brahmanas, please know that I am the supreme shelter of the yoga system, analytic philosophy, virtuous action, truthful religious and principles, power, beauty, fame, and self-control. According to Srila Sridhar Swamiji, the synonymous words satyasya and ratasya refer to respectively the proper and virtuous execution of religious principles and a convincing presentation of religion. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakura points out that the sons of Brahma were struck with wonder at the presentation of Supreme Personal Godhead and were thinking, what a wonderful knowledge we have just heard. The Lord, recognizing their astonishment, spoke this verse to confirm their understanding of him. All superior transcendental qualities such as being beyond the modes of nature, detached, the well-wisher, the most dear, the supersoul, equally situated everywhere, and free from material entanglement. All such qualities, free from the transformations of material qualities, find their shelter and worshipable object in me. Lord Krishna continued to tell Uddhava, my dear Uddhava, thus all of the doubts of the sages headed by Sanaka were destroyed by my words. Fully worshipping me with transcendental love and devotion, they chanted my glories with excellent hymns. The greatest sages headed by Sanaka Rishi thus perfectly worshipped and glorified Lord Krishna. As Lord Brahma looked on, I returned to my own abode. Lord Krishna went about to his Brahmaloka and Lord Krishna disappeared as a Hamsa to his Loka. Thus, and the purports of the humble servants of his divine A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada to the 11th canto, 13th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam entitled Hamsa Avathara. 13ನೇ ಅಧ್ಯಾಯವು ಮುಗಿಯಿತು. ಇತಿ ಶ್ರೀಮದ್ ಮಹಾಭಾಗವತೆ ಮಹಾಪುರಾಣೆ ಪಾರಮಹಂಸ ಸಂಹಿತಾಯ ಏಕಾದಶ ಸ್ಕಂದೆ ತ್ರಯೋದಶೋಧ್ಯಾಯಃ ಪೂರ್ಣಃ. ಓಂ ಹರಿ ಓಂ ನಮೋಸ್ತು ಅನಂತಾಯ ಸಹಸ್ರಮೂರ್ತಯೇ ಸಹಸ್ರಪಾದಾಕ್ಷರಭಾವ ಸಹಸ್ರನಾಮ್ನೆ ಪುರುಷಾಶ್ರುತಯ ಸಹಸ್ರಕೋಟಿ ಯುಗಧಾರಿಣೇ ನಮಃ. ಸಹಸ್ರಕೋಟಿ ಯುಗಧಾರಿಣೇ ನಮಃ. ಆಕಾಶಾತ್ ಪರಿತಮ್ಯತಾಗರ್ ಸಾಗರಂ ಸರ್ವದೇ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರಃ. श्रीकेशं प्रजत्तो नमः. सर्ववेदेशत्पुण्यं सर्वतीर्थेषु तत्फलं प्रमाप्ति वासनात् वासुदेवस्य वासन्ते जयत्रयं सर्वभूतनिवासो सेवासुवृत्ते कायेन वाचा मनसेन्द्रियैर्वा बुद्ध्यात्मना वा प्रकृते स्वभावात् करोमि यद्दत्सकलं परस्मै नारायणायेति समर्पयामि. नारायणायेति समर्पयामि.